Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. This is Inclusive Design 24 2022. A big thank you to our platinum sponsors, Fable and Intopia, and to our gold sponsors, Barrier Break, TPGI, and UX for the Win. If you do the whole Twitter thing, you can find us at ID24Conf, and the hashtag that we'll be using for this conference is hashtag ID24. While you're watching on YouTube, you can also participate in the chat if you're so inclined. And with all that said, I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Makoto. Take it away.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Makoto from Tokyo, Japan. Next, we have Adrian Roseri talking about overlays underwhelm. Over to you, Adrian.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Makoto. Long time no chat. So the title of this talk is Overlays Underwhelm. I may have had the title of the talk before I had the content fully written. You will see that I will try to shoehorn this over-under theme into the talk. And the nice thing is I'm protected from hearing all of your groans thanks to the magic of one-way audio. All right. I include this ego slide to give you the barest indication that I have some experience. While I want my arguments to stand on merit, I understand you might want to know my chops. So I've got some business info there. I've co-written some books, sites, articles, and so on. You can look me up online to confirm all of this stuff. I'll provide URLs at the end. So now onto the meat of the talk. We should consider what gaps accessibility overlays are filling. The web has lots of accessibility bits already built in. And there are more tools and features available to developers and users than ever before. After all, as Tim Berners-Lee once said, quote, "The B4520 gets you there faster and bypasses that nasty roundabout outside Swindon," end quote. I may have gotten that quote wrong. So let's ask first, what is an overlay? An overlay is a tool that provides some sort of accessibility or usability feature that may not be built into the underlying site. Sometimes it replicates native features and sometimes it offers some other affordance. Often it does the work in the end user's browser, relying on each user's computer to replicate the same work as every other user's computer. They can also be referred to as widgets, toolbars, or add-ons. There were many tools that predated native features or that were created to fill gaps in technology, including assistive technology. Some techniques and standards may not have been defined or even well supported when these tools were created. The risk is that these tools required users to learn them anew for every site with features that would not carry across sites from site to site. This might be loud, just as an FYI, so maybe quickly turn down audio a bit.
GB flag. Change region. Products. For education. Read and write. Equatio. Speech stream. RaiQ. Fluency tutor. Orbit note. For work. Read and write.
So that was Browsaloud. It's an early example of an add-on tool. It converts the text on a page to speech. As you can see and or hear, it offers no context for what is being read, visible or not. It was never meant to replicate screen readers. Instead, it's akin to a feature you can find built into browsers today, such as Edge's Immersive Reader. Browsaloud requires a third-party embedded script, and back in 2018 was briefly hacked to mine cryptocurrencies. What's going on there? Almost played again. Some widgets made an effort to replicate features already in browsers and operating systems. These ranged from text sizing widgets to contrast and lightness to motion control and even zooming and magnification. This text sizing widget should have no audio. This text sizing widget shows how they can go wrong. It's no longer available on this site, so you can't try it yourself. Assuming you could find it behind a gear icon, the control only appeared when you were at the top of the page. The widget only resized article content, not headlines, not navigation, nothing else. Since that article content was outside the viewport, it also made it near impossible to compare the different sizing options. It does not retain the size as you navigate the site and when you return to the site or even with the print styles. Better implementations have shown users how to change their browser or operating system settings instead of relying on a tool like this. However, this could be a useful stopgap feature to gauge if users regularly scale text and then adjust those text size defaults on your site as a result. Some widgets exist because there is no native equivalent, or the needs are not well represented in what exists. Success of those widgets comes down to how well they perform. There might be some audio in this one, well, but I didn't think so. I think it might just be background noises. HandTalk is another add-on. It will load an animated avatar to sign the content of a page. Like the text-to-speech example earlier, it presents the content of the page in sign language. It still cannot offer the same context for what content is associated with what other content, so the user might need to also read along. I did not explore how many sign languages it supports, but to its credit, it is not fingerspelling everything that it encounters. But I leave it to the audience to judge its value. The current list of overlay vendors is not necessarily filling these gaps, however. They are capitalizing on a general lack of understanding of people and disparate needs, focusing on selling quick fixes to businesses instead. These companies include Accessibility, Accessaway, AdAlley, AudioEye, Redacted, Facility, Max Access, Purple Lens, Redacted, and Userway. There are also vendors that white label some of these products, so you might encounter them under a different name. Overlays tend to overstate their abilities. In technical reviews, they consistently underperform. Automated accessibility testing tools are not perfect, but we can use them to get a sense of whether or not an overlay has improved WCAG compliance of a page. I used an automated checker to compare the number of errors before and after an overlay was activated, and the page had more detectable WCAG errors after. The examples that follow are about a year old. I opted not to retest them because I have no interest in providing free testing. Besides, these vendors were claiming WCAG compliance when I initially tested, so if they were lying then, there's no reason to assume they would stop now. DQ's Axe browser plugin prides itself on no false positives. As a result, it may be more lenient than a human tester would be. After running an overlay on the vendor's own page, the number of detectable errors identified by Axe tripled from 4 to 12. The screenshots that I have here show that difference. TPGI's Arc Toolkit plugin is less likely to be lenient. When testing the same page, as shown in these screenshots, the number of detectable errors doubled, jumping from 19 to 38 when the overlay was activated. Arc also jumped from 164 warnings to 193. Remember, warnings don't represent clear WCAG violations, but instead warrant some sort of manual testing to confirm them. More screenshots, same page, this time with WebAIM's Wave Checker browser plugin, which returned no violations without the overlay active. After the overlay was activated, a single contrast violation appeared. I have written before about my concern that Accessibility was spoofing Wave, though I cannot wade into the code to confirm this. Wave used to display the message, quote, "The third-party Accessibility integration on this page may temporarily modify content when Wave is activated, resulting in interference with Wave's detection of and accuracy identifying accessibility and compliance issues," end quote. I know that was a long sentence. We know that automated accessibility testing tools only identify about 30% of issues. That number shifts based on complexity and other factors. That 30% number acknowledges that much of WCAG requires human judgment based on context. Overlay vendors claim they can address the other 70%. It's a bold claim, and it's also easy to disprove. The Stop Animations button on this overlay fails to stop the auto-playing background video. To compound the confusion, the button changes only its accessible name when pressed. It does not use ARIA press to indicate that it has been activated. That flicker you saw where the flag restarted had nothing to do with the button. That's simply because the YouTube video used as the background loops and has an awkward loop. I tried the keyboard navigation feature of one vendor since its unaddressed navigation violates 1.4.13 content on hover and 2.4.7 focus visible. Even after I activate the feature, focus styles are still missing. Eventually, a new box appears with different links. I was tabbing so much already that I tabbed past the item that displayed the instructions. To drive home the point, it drops me into a de facto keyboard trap in its cookie pop-up. That tabbing is me getting frustrated. It's not just the claimed fixes that don't work. The tools themselves present barriers. The button in the background video is one example with its broken accessible name and or state conveyance. In other cases, screen reader users have noted they hear sounds from the overlay with no explanation of what the sounds mean. The tools don't even prevent their own customer from making brand new WCAG violations. Here, for example, in this set of screenshots, the overlay is very tall. So I broke the image into 4 separate images to capture the entire height of it. It shows how the contrast of the controls is so light, it is hard to determine if one is active or at what degree it is active. Some of the text and icons are illegible. The language selector, which commits the internationalization sin of using flags to choose language, provides no alt attributes for those flags. The overlay itself violates at least 3 WCAG success criteria from just a few seconds of examination. Part of this is because the configuration options for the overlay customer do not prevent them, the overlay customer from choosing colors that clearly fail contrast checks. Here, the white text on the pink-white background has a contrast ratio of 1.2 to 1. The overlay vendor, the overlay tool itself, allowed its customer to do this. It allowed its customer to choose WCAG violating color combinations. Here we can see that the browser's default focus ring is active, but then the browser alert prompting the user to activate the overlay appears. If the user declines to activate the overlay, that focus ring is somehow removed. The only clue that focus is changing is in the browser status bar or when the page jumps to scroll down. Here I navigate an overlay vendor's site, and this might get loud in a moment. And as the new page is loading, it grays itself as if a modal will appear. Then hidden audio starts.
Hi, I'm Ronnie from Accessiby, the #1 fully automated ADA and WCAG compliance solution. In this video, you will learn how Accessiby's AI-powered technology makes any website accessible and compliant with the WCAG 2.1, the ADA.
You could see that I clicked on that gray area in the hopes that maybe a hidden video modal would disappear. I scrolled around the page looking for player controls. I also hit the escape key with no luck. The page itself is a good example of a 1.4.2 audio control violation and 1.2.1 audio only and video only pre-recorded violation presented by the overlay tool itself. Oops. Here is an overlay button trigger with an icon of a paper boat or hat. I don't know which it is. And the visible text is customized accessibility. The browser dev tools indicate it has focus, but thanks to an outline none important declaration, there is no visible style. So that is a 2.4.7 focus visible failure right out of the gate. The boat/hat icon image has alternative text. The alt text does not describe the image. Instead, it reads manage display settings. That feels like a 1.1.1 non-text content failure to me. That makes the full accessible name of the button manage display settings customized accessibility. Kind of a long name. But the button has an ARIA label that reads facility: adapt display, which overrides the text we can see, which is a 2.5.3 label and name failure. So that's 3 WCAG failures on the very button from the overlay vendor that triggers the accessibility features that it has sold its end user, or its customer rather. The following examples are from Accessibility. The reason Accessibility is more prominent in my tweets and posts and random shouts is because it seems to be the loudest at using its venture funding to promote its product. It took a year for Accessibility to update the terms on its site after I flagged these. I have no idea what terms are written into their contracts, however, and those contracts may retain this language. I just don't know. Other vendors have made similar compliance promises and may have similarly mooted those promises in their terms, in their contracts. From the Accessibility homepage, question, does Accessibility protect me from lawsuits? Answer, absolutely. Accessibility turns inaccessible websites into WCAG and ADA compliant websites. But not only that, Accessibility provides you with a litigation support package in case you need to prove your ADA website compliance and guides you through the process. Here's another one from the same homepage. Question, does Accessibility cover all accessibility requirements? Answer, yes. Accessibility covers the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.1 at the AA level success criteria, and in certain areas, even level AAA. This is a step beyond what legislation requires. But that differed from the Accessibility terms and conditions page, here captured from December 2020. In this section, Accessibility is defining the word, quote, standard, end quote, to mean specifically, quote, WCAG 2.1 level AA success criteria, end quote. From the Accessibility terms, quote, the functionality of the Accessibility systems requires that the licensee website in which they are embedded be websites based solely on HTML files and tags, and that the source code be written according to the standard of the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, without any errors or validation warning in W3C's troubleshooting inspections. Please note that licensee changes to such website may impact the functionality of the service. By way of example, Accessibility systems do not support other components such as Canvas, Flash, and/or SVG, end quote. Essentially, Accessibility states that its customer websites must already meet the standard, and they define the standard as WCAG 2.1 AA, with no errors and even no warnings from the validator. So essentially, your site must be WCAG compliant to conform to Accessibility's terms, or at least its 2020 terms, for a product guaranteeing to make your site WCAG compliant. Accessibility then goes on to exempt PDFs, Flash, SVG files, and even any mobile devices not running Android 8 or iOS 10, like they anchored on specific versions. Now, to remind you that Accessibility is not the only one making these claims, here is UserWay's site. It says it will make your site ADA compliant, which is not a thing. It brags about the lack of lawsuits mentioning it. I think there are some out there. It claims to have a strong reputation in the disability community. It asserts its privacy chops, and it claims it is secure by not tracking people with disabilities. UserWay may be right about lawsuits mentioning its products, but I believe there are some out there. I think I have them linked from a post. I also don't have a LexisNexis subscription to find them all. However, I can say that many lawsuits do not always name the overlay vendor. Many of these vendors claim they can protect their customers from lawsuits. Accessibility's CEO has even written, quote, never, not once, had encountered a company that got sued because of Accessibility, end quote. Yet in 2020, over 250 companies were sued after investing in overlays. And that number has been ticking up over the last couple of years. I did not put the latest numbers in here, my fault. But it has been, it picked up to about 1 per day by the end of 2021. I should probably link that in the updated post. Here are just 5 examples, at least one of which mentions the vendor by name. 4 of them mention Accessibility despite its CEO's claims. You can look these up at your leisure. Colasar versus Byet LLC, Thomas Klaus and Robert Jehoda versus Upright Technologies, Blair Douglas versus Masterbuilt Manufacturing LLC, Murphy versus iBobs LLC, Fischler et al. Versus Dorai Homes, and finally Lighthouse et al. Versus ADP. The Lighthouse versus ADP case goes further and explicitly states that, and I quote, For the purpose of this agreement, overlay solutions such as those currently provided by companies such as AudioEye and Accessiby will not suffice to achieve accessibility, end quote. Will not suffice. The iBobs case concluded in a settlement where iBobs has to create an accessibility team, perform an audit, and adopt a policy statement, implement an accessibility strategy, and provide accessibility training. The overlay did not protect iBobs in this case. Wired wrote an article on it titled, "This Company Tapped AI for Its Website and Landed in Court." I want to read a chunk from that article now. Quote, in a statement, Accessiby's head of marketing, Gil Magan, said the company had analyzed iBob's website and found it complied with accessibility standards. Accessiby offers clients assistance with litigation, but iBobs declined, the statement said. In its own statement, iBobs said Accessiby failed to respond to requests for meetings with its lawyers. Subquote, iBobs is no longer working with Accessiby, nor will we in the future, end subquote, the statement said, end quote. Nesting quotes, kind of a weird thing to convey in a talk. Sometimes a company relies on the overlay as its only way to become accessible to its customers. But what happens when the script will not load? Malwarebytes has blocked them. Ad blockers have blocked them. Firefox Enhanced Privacy Protection blocks them. What if the script has an error or the network chunks? Is your site then, quote, protected, end quote? Are the users helped? This screenshot of Browser DevTools shows that the overlay script has not loaded. Worse, that accessibility link in the footer is just a div with a tab index and a button roll. It does nothing else when clicked because the overlay script is supposed to replace it with a real control. But when it doesn't load, it doesn't work. On the Malwarebytes forum, a user wanted to know if the script from an overlay vendor was a tracker or not. The Malwarebytes staff acknowledged it had been blocked. Until the user asked the question, Malwarebytes had blocked the overlay for all its customers for potentially years. The claims of no privacy risk are spurious at best. Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA, is a process to help you identify and minimize the data protection risks of a project. You must do a DPIA for processing information that is likely to result in a high risk to individuals. The vendors do not provide one. As a result, any claimed GDPR compliance is in question. Remember that these overlay scripts must parse all the content on the page, essentially reading everything that you are surfing. Some of them keep your settings from site to site by setting tracking cookies. Here in a tweet, Leonie Watson demonstrates how cavalierly overlay vendors treat this compliance. The tweet from Leonie, quote, "Hello, Accessiby. I've asked you by DM and by phone for a copy of your Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA, and you have not responded. Since asking discreetly has not worked, I am now asking openly for you to share your DPIA since you claim GDPR conformance. Thank you," end quote. Leonie asked on April 1, 2021, and still has not heard back more than a year later. I'm not a lawyer. This might be a GDPR violation. Yeah. The DSW site uses redacted assistive overlay product, though instead of an accessibility icon in the corner, it uses the text, quote, "enable accessibility," end quote, in gray on gray, located in the header. If you block third-party cookies, you get the following browser alert when you try to activate it. Quote, "An embedded page at a40.redacted.com says, your web browser privacy settings are preventing the accessibility mode to stay enabled. Try enabling third-party cookies to ensure you receive accessible updates to the website," end quote. So this presents a false choice between security and what may be a more accessible experience. Nowhere does the user have the opportunity to understand how those third-party cookies will be used, what information will be shared. Essentially, a user has to disclose a disability or access need with no indication how that information will persist on the web. It's also a reminder that these products don't make a site more accessible. Instead, these products make your computer, the end user's computer, try to make a site less broken. In August 2022, the Federal Trade Commission announced an advance notice of proposed rulemaking for a rule on commercial surveillance and data security. I left a comment specifically about the non-HIPAA health data to which overlays have access, along with my concerns that they can sell it to data brokers. Since 99.98% of Americans can be identified from an anonymized data set with only 15 data points, this should be a genuine concern. I hope the FTC treats it as such. Overlay vendors will overpromise in their marketing, making claims about their utility and popularity while under-delivering on them. These vendors rely on a combination of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They know many website owners do not understand accessibility laws. Even as users complain about the problems with these products, the vendors use astroturfing techniques to drown it out. This is an advertisement from one of the overlay vendors. It is a cartoon of a man at a computer happily exclaiming, "Finally, my website is up." Two men in suits suddenly appear next to him holding legal papers and say, "Not so fast. A nice website, but it's not accessible. You've been served." The website owner, now crying, hands up in the air, says, "I'm broke now. Why bother?" In the background, the two men can be seen walking away carrying bags of money. Overlay vendors use fear of lawsuits to sell their product, not a desire to help users. The cartoon is careful to not show disabled people as the villains, but the implication is clear. The laws that protect disabled people will cost you money unless you pay for the vendor's help. One vendor cited that a, quote, silent majority, end quote, of users like the overlay product, and that as a result, the complaints that appear online are only exceptions. Here, Chancey Fleet tweets, quote, "The founders of Accessibility are interpreting the complacency of non-disabled customers and the bone-deep fatigue of disabled users to mean that a, quote, silent majority, quote, their actual words, is grateful for and enjoys Accessibility. Let's not be silent then," end quote. That was in reply to a tweet from Marco Salsiccio, who says, quote, "Pretty much as well as citing their silent majority of blind users who approve and test their product, I ran into so many issues just going through their example sites alone. I didn't want to give them a fully free audit of how much they were doing wrong," end quote. In addition, these vendors have a history of astroturfing review sites, social media, and the web in general. The effort is to ensure only their message appears, and they have the money, SEO chops, and lack of integrity to do it. I have links to Twitter spam, Medium articles, paid promotion pieces at industry sites, questionable reviews on other platforms, even Wikipedia entries that were flagged by the moderators as spam. The image here shows a headline from WP Tavern when one vendor had all the fake reviews for its plugin removed. And that's specifically for the WordPress plugin. In addition to individual complaints, there has been press coverage of these companies. Users with some standing in the disability community have spoken about overlay failures in general. Some users are so frustrated they share tips and tools to block overlays. Two vendors have even threatened users with lawsuits. NBC News ran a story with the headline, "Blind People Advocates Slam Company Claiming to Make Websites ADA Compliant." Vice also ran an article headlined, "People with Disabilities Say This AI Tool is Making the Web Worse for Them." The New York Times published one over the summer. "For blind internet users, the fix can be worse than the flaws." The Mosen at Large podcast devoted an entire episode to the question of the value of overlays. Episode 105 asked, "Can AI make the web fully accessible in a few short years, or might it make matters worse?" A chunk of a follow-up episode was devoted to more frustrations from users. Other community podcasts have discussed these tools as well. Some users are so frustrated that they have written tools to block overlays. Accessibility gives instructions for how to block overlays using ad blockers or by editing your host file. Accessibility is a browser extension to disable overlays in the browser. One overlay has opted to fight back. In April 2021, facilities attorneys started sending letters demanding removal of any criticism. This letter to Kona shows two tweets about Facility. Kona declined to comply with the request and wrote about why. Another disabled user, who I am not naming here, but I have shared their plight on Twitter, was subpoenaed to appear in court. Facility had asked for 5,000 euros in damages, 5,500 euros in fines, and in order to cease comments that may, quote, discredit the Facility solution, end quote. I cannot think of a better way to prove your product helped disabled users than by suing disabled people who say it does not. That story got some press in France in Numerana with the headline, which I machine translated, Facility, the solution for online inclusion that refuses criticism. Another overlay vendor threatened a lawsuit for valid criticism, specifically AudioEye. You can read AudioEye's cease and desist letter to me, along with my response on my Webotron site, which will be linked at the end. Overlay vendors also claim that organizations love them, but community and industry organizations have been clear that they do not. National Federation of the Blind, after accepting one as a sponsor for its annual event, went so far as to not only drop the sponsor, but to then issue a statement rebuking its very existence. This part of the statement stood out to me. Quote, in particular, it is the opinion of the board that Accessibility peremptorily and scornfully dismisses the concerns blind people have about its products and its approach to accessibility. The nation's blind will not be placated, bullied, or bought off. Therefore, the board revoked Accessibility sponsorship of the convention on June 22, 2021, end quote. The CSUN Assistive Technology Conference briefly had an overlay on its site and was met with such rapid and vocal anger that it was dropped immediately. It may very well have been implemented without anyone's knowledge based on this tweet, which reads, quote, the accessibility overlay has been removed. It was implemented without our approval. The conference does not endorse this product, and we apologize for the situation, which has now been corrected, end quote. The Olympic Committee created the We the 15 site in an effort to promote the Paralympics, but in doing so used an overlay. After responses from users in the disability community, the overlay was removed within a couple days. That same overlay is still on the main Olympics website, which may be a function of the vendor promoting it so heavily in its marketing materials. One of the We the 15's tweets in response, quote, thank you for alerting us about these issues. We're disappointed too that we've fallen short in this area. We've gathered together some new experts who are helping us to fix this. It would be great to have your support going forward to make the next iteration a complete success, end quote. Many overlay vendors claim that detractors are really just frustrated competitors. The overlay fact sheet disproves that. Over 700 people have signed it. They represent web specification contributors, internal accessibility experts from companies and higher education, lawyers for the disabled, contributors to assistive technology, and end users with disabilities. I encourage you to visit the site at overlayfactsheet.com and read through the information and links. It identifies strengths and weaknesses of overlay widgets and automated repair. It also touches on technical and privacy concerns. In addition to the signatures, there are statements from users. There is one professional organization for digital accessibility practitioners, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, or IAAP. It is a division of G3ICT, G3ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive Information and Communication Technologies. It allows membership for overlay vendors. Overlay vendors then brand their marketing materials with the IAAP logo. Similarly, the W3C allows for anyone to set up an unaffiliated community group. Overlay vendors use these as veneers of credibility. Some organizations display the IAAP logo in the footer. And when I say organizations, I mean overlay vendors. Userway and Max Access each do so using the weight of accessibility professionals as a marketing boost. Others might get promotional consideration as AudioEye did when IAAP tweeted an AudioEye post. A post arguably lifted from W3C documents, by the way. There was finally some fallout, though. On January 17, IAAP promised a, quote, proactive, end quote, response to that tweet and overlay membership, even though I raised the concern in September along with others. It produced a survey from members and non-members. The results of that survey were posted on Friday, February 25th. Of the 609 responses, 591 of them, or 97%, were not overlay vendors. 81% of them, or 478 responses, state they do not compete with overlay vendors. 549 responses, or 90%, say they have seen false claims by overlay vendors. And 533 responses, or 86%, believe IAAP should comment on marketing claims in general. Oh, and 90%, 549 respondents, believe IAAP should comment on overlay marketing claims specifically. In May, representatives from UserWay and AudioEye proposed an overlay community group to the W3C and got the votes, approval, and the call for participation up in 12 hours. The next day, it deleted the call for participation and then sat dormant. Almost a month later, it renamed itself to Accessibility at the Edge, and used a novel interpretation of edge computing to justify and obfuscate its purpose. 2 months after that, it reposted its call for participation, this time framing it as an accessibility community group that just happens to include overlays. And so overlays veneer of a W3C blessing is complete. As we have seen, overlays cannot make your site or your brand better overnight. To wrap this talk, I want to cover some steps you can undertake without overlays. First, plan ahead. Hire a consultant who has some experience in this space. They can help you choose a vendor who prioritizes accessibility and write this into your contracts. They can also direct you to technologies that have been vetted. Some platforms have accessible features already. For example, WordPress offers 114, last I checked, free accessibility-ready themes, built with a baseline of compliance already in place. Add some free online resources when you create your content, and you may have all you need to get going. There's even a free tool to generate an accessibility statement for your site, provided by the very organization that sets accessibility standards. That's the W3C, in case I wasn't obvious. Now, what if you already have a site? You can use one of the many free automated accessibility checkers on the market, assuming you aren't interested in getting into the browser's own tools. There is Arc, Axe, Lighthouse, Wave, and WebHint, among others. While they will not catch all the issues, maybe around 30%, they will at least give you a sense where you stand. Where you have gaps, document them. Identify what is wrong, put together a plan and a timeline to address them. Publish it on your site when you generate an accessibility statement. As long as you honor the timelines you provide, you can choose what your ongoing budget will be to address them, even if it's only $1,000 a year. If you are affected by overlays as a consumer, then you can take some action. In the US, the Federal Trade Commission has rules that advertising must not be deceptive, must include evidence, and cannot be unfair. OverlayFalseClaims.com provides documented examples of overlay vendor false claims, along with consumer complaint resources for the US, federal and state, Canada, and New Zealand. You can use information there to file a false advertising complaint. You can also open a PR to submit information for filing complaints in other countries. I mentioned earlier that the FTC is taking feedback on its proposed rule on commercial surveillance and data security. Please consider leaving a comment. Do so before Friday, October 21, 2022. The URL I have posted is a bit long, but I linked to it from my site. I also have a link to my comment on my site with some language that you can copy and reuse for your own comment, and I implore you to consider doing so. To wrap up this session, I have posted links, or rather, I will post links. I ran out of time to do so before the talk, but it will include some of the material I've referenced throughout. You can get to it by scanning the QR code on the screen, or go to the URL, rosel.li/ID24-2022. To restate that, rosel.li/ID24-2022. Thank you very much. And I think we're ready for question time.
Thank you so much, Adrian. It was very informative. And I don't see any questions from the audience on the YouTube, Twitter, but I see some comments like on the YouTube chat, Melissa was enjoying the big red arrow commentary. Where is my focus? Or, oh, come on. And we just got a tweet from Jared Smith of WebAIM. Wow, Adrian's overlays underwhelm ID24 session is the best takedown of overlays I've heard or seen. It's well researched and extremely slow. So
thank you, Jared.
And I came up with couple of questions. First one is, what do you think is the biggest risk overlays represent for the organizations that choose to use them?
I think it's reputational harm. I think if an organization uses an overlay for the users who most need a site to be accessible, once they encounter it, they know that the organization has made a decision that is based on finances and sort of a risk aversion, lawsuit risk aversion, as opposed to genuinely trying to do something for its users, for its constituents, for its customers. And that reputational harm is really hard to come back from.
Thank you. And another one is, so there are so many different overlays out there, which provide different functionalities for different user needs. So when we talk about overlays, we must define the term overlay, what it exactly means. So my question is, do you think overlay is considered as one of assistive technologies, or it is a kind of the functionality websites are providing to users?
So the trick is the term overlay can mean different things to different people. And the way I look at an overlay is, listen, if your site is not accessible and you're relying on my computer to fetch somebody else's code to dynamically fix your site, and maybe it doesn't work or doesn't load or creates other problems, now you're looking at an overlay. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a little button that you click to enable accessibility. It doesn't necessarily mean that you made an active decision to enable it. The term overlay initially came from the fact that they were very visible overlays that, blocked all the content until you clicked or pressed some things. But I think they started to become a bit more nuanced and become a bit less overt in their display. So that's why I fall back to if you're making my computer do the work or every end user's computer, instead of just doing it yourself, I personally am inclined to start with the assumption that's probably an overlay and then work from there.
Thank you so much. Eric, do you have any questions? Over to you.
Sure, yeah. And thank you for such a well-researched and compelling and candidly disturbing talk.
Sure.
I think just for some people who are tuning in, again, what's one thing that a consumer, somebody who is not necessarily running a website, but who browses the web, what's one thing they can do right now to kind of protect themselves from the myriad harms that overlays seem to cause?
My off the cuff answer is to install the plugins, the browser extensions or other tools that block overlays, because I think there is a genuine privacy and security risk associated with them. And if the overlay itself demonstrably makes a site less accessible, which a lot of them do in my examples, then don't take the risk. Just remove it, get rid of it, do whatever you have to do to block it. It protects your privacy, your security. It keeps your CPU and your battery from burning through more cycles, all in the service of a terrible technology decision. So that's my off the cuff response. I'm sure I could come up with something more nuanced if I had time and gin, but that's what I got for now.
Yeah, thank you. And then kind of one last question here is, wow, just completely blanked. 1 second, coming back to me.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Terrible as a consultant.
I wish, I guess less a question and more a prompt for you to provide a little bit more detail, but could you discuss a little bit more the issues surrounding involuntarily disclosing disability to unknown parties?
Yeah. So I talked about non-HIPAA data, and non-HIPAA data is basically information about your medical health, lifestyle, whatever, any information about you that's not explicitly covered by HIPAA, because it doesn't come from your physician. The problem with that is we know organizations do stuff with that information, and it can be anything from potentially adjusting your rates for health insurance to blocking your ability to participate in events, apply for jobs, and so on. It's difficult for me to go into a lot of detail about it because I don't have the lived experience of having been discriminated against simply because of an assumed, perceived, visible, whatever disability. But everything I've heard is that once that disability that maybe you didn't want to disclose is known, things change, and they don't always change for the better. And I think that's a huge concern here. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. I think that's it for me. Makoto, any last things that popped to mind?
We got more positive comments from the audience. So thank you again, Adrian, for your super presentation.
Thank you for letting me come and present it at this wonderful event, Inclusive Design 24, held by awesome people with wonderful co-hosts.
Oh, shucks.
Oh, shucks.
So, yeah, on that note, if you enjoyed this talk, as the youths say, you can smash that like and subscribe button on YouTube to show your appreciation and both also receive updates for future content to come. Also, a reminder that Inclusive Design 24 is a welcoming community. You can find a link to our code of conduct on the footer of every page on our website, which is inclusivedesign24.org. And a reminder that Inclusive Design is brought to you by Fable, Intopia, Barrier Break, TPGI, UX for the Win, Equal Entry, InfoAxia, Intuit, the Law Office of Lainey Feingold, Adrian Roselli LLC, and WebAble. Thanks to their generosity, we're able to bring this conference to you for free, and we really appreciate their support. We'll be back on the hour with our next session. Adrian, thank you again, and Makoto, thank you to you as well. You were a lovely co-host.
Domo arigato so much.
Thank you, and cheers.